Uh, Moving ahead to the next segment of our conversation.
Hundreds of books in my library, and then thousands of books on my hard drive.
What does the word Itihaasa mean? Like if you translate it in English, what is the Sanskrit word for mythology?
The word is considered okay at some point of time. It is not now.
What is your specific argument against calling our epics myths? Moving ahead to the next segment of our conversation, and you are someone one would say is very passionate about Sanskrit, right? So, how did you learn Sanskrit? What was your story of learning the language?
Sure. It started with the Bhagavad Gita. Right from the age of 6 or 7, I used to read a small version of Bhagavad Gita with the Hindi meaning published by Gita Press. And then I read the Ramacharita, which is not in Sanskrit, but has some Sanskrit verses at the beginning of every kanda. And the language is highly Sanskritized. So the words, the wide range of words present in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Manas, and then later I read the Valmiki Ramayana, always fascinated me. Like we have, in our day-to-day vocabulary, we don't use so many words, but why do we have so many different words for a lotus in Sanskrit? Like 30, 50, maybe 100. Why do we have so many different words for the eye or the sun? So that was, as a child, I found it fascinating. I did read Sanskrit at school. I was in a Kendriya Vidyalaya, and we had the NCERT books, which are still very good quality, which were very good quality then, and which are very good quality now. So we had the Swasti series, and now I think now the NCERT publishes the Ruchira series. So Swasti I read from 5th till 9th, and then in my 10th grade I took Sanskrit as an optional subject with no teacher. So I studied on my own, read some help books, some grammar books, and then attempted my exam. I was the only person in the examination hall writing the examination. Yes. I also had the fortune of studying Sanskrit in 11th and 12th as my second language. So I was in Gujarat board. I took English as my first language and Sanskrit as my, not Gujarati or Hindi, but Sanskrit as my second language. So I read it in 11th and 12th. Then when I went for my engineering studies, I lost touch. But when I was studying at IIM Bangalore, I was at Gangaram's bookstore, I think on MG Road. Yes. First or second floor. And there I saw the 2-volume, the Ashtadhyayi of Panini with the English translation by Shrish Chandra Vasu. I bought that book and then I started reading Sanskrit grammar. It was then when I realized this is something very mathematical, very scientific, very structured. So I should learn more about it. So that's when I started getting into Sanskrit seriously. So I read the works of Kalidasa. I bought a lot of grammar books. I collected so many books over time, hundreds of books in my library, and then thousands of books on my hard drive. So mostly it was, apart from the point that in school I had a teacher, mostly this is all Swadhyaya and self-learning, which I believe is the best learning. Unless you are convinced yourself that you understood a topic, you don't move further. So that's my story, Swadhyaya, mostly Swadhyaya, and a lot of guidance from books that I have read from my guru, Swami Ramabhadracharya, whose works I have read, from all the great teachers whose books I have read. So I would like to thank all of them, but mostly it is through Swadhyaya.
Right. And I thought, because this is the most frequently asked question, and I'm sure most people would want to know this, you have a problem with the word mythology, especially this whole thing, this whole trend. A lot of people also agree with you on that. This mythification of Itihaasas. So firstly, what does the word Itihaasa mean? Like if you translate it in English, what is the Sanskrit word for mythology? And what is your specific argument against calling our epics myths?
Right. So Itihasa, there's a Nirukti, the famous Nirukti, which says Itihaasa. It's not a grammatical derivation, it's not a Vyutpatti, but a Nirukti. But we have had a rich tradition of Niruktis. Itihaasa. Iti, thus, her, certainly, asa, was. Thus, certainly, was. This is the meaning of the word Itihasa, as per the Nirukti. In the context of Indic texts, we say Ramayana and Mahabharata are Itihasa. Puranas are not Itihasas, they are Puranas. So when we mention Shruti, Smriti, Purana, Itihasa, Itihas specifically refers to Ramayana and Mahabharata. We also say Itihas, we also call history Itihasa. So what is proper history, which is through archaeological remains or textual studies, that is also called Itihasa in Hindi. So the word is used for both. There's a lot of multivalence in Sanskrit words, and there are no exact translations. Now, Itihas, or why don't we call Itihas mythology? I think the word mythology is used very selectively. Well, a prophet on a flying horse is not mythology. Well, it is as unbelievable as some of the things you claim are mythology. So why not Christian mythology, Muslim mythology? Why is the word mythology used only for Hindu epics selectively? That is something which I don't quite agree with. So I would say let's call them Itihasas, let's call them Indic sources or Puranas. Yes, there are things which a modern rational reader would not believe, but so is the case with so many other different texts also all over the world. So to be fair, let's call them Hindu scriptures or Itihasas. Mythology, okay, I mean, if you call if everything is consistently called mythology, then maybe it's okay. But selectively calling Indic texts mythology and at the same time Bible is not mythology, that's something which is not done. Because if you say something is a myth in the Ramayana, then there's so many other myths in the Bible also, or the Quran also. So let's call everything a myth, or let's call none of them a myth.
Correct. I think it also has to do with the whole pagan gaze, like gaze towards indigenous pagan traditions, that sometimes comes from monotheistic traditions, which is why they use mythology for Greek, Rome, all over the world, wherever they have gone and spread the word. Right. They use mythology everywhere. And
Right.
it seems like a way to fossilize, to quote unquote Rajiv Malhotra.
Yes. I mean, it has a negative connotation, and there's also always a sense of superiority when somebody uses, this is mythological. These are mythological tales. These are cock and bull stories. That's the sense. You say it's mythology, but your sense is that these are cock and bull stories, correct. Which is not correct. So, for example, the word was considered okay at some point of time. It is not now. Now, blacks identify themselves as blacks. They do not accept the N word. We can't even say it on camera. So, similarly, every tradition or every culture has a right to assert itself and say that we don't identify with this word. Please do not use this word. So it's as simple as that.
What's your issue with Devdutt Patnaik? And why?
I have issues with misinformation. And if misinformation comes from Devdutt Patnaik, then I have issues. There are no personal issues, but I find a lot of his works are actually Alice in Wonderland, kind of fantasies, fantasy stories. It's his own wonderland. And especially when it comes to interpretation of Sanskrit texts, when you say that, okay, the Gita says this, but it does not, the verse says something else, then the problem is with misinformation. A lot of people take him seriously. And so if there is misinformation, if a lot of people take it seriously, then I have issues, and then I put the right side out. It's no personal issues. Right. But things like you see a painting of two women, and you say they are lesbians, two gopis in a cave, and you say they are lesbians. Are they lesbians? Or even his book My Gita, where is complete distortion of the meanings of the original text. And for somebody to write a book without knowing Sanskrit, it's questionable in the first place. But then to interpret without any respect to the rules of the language, and then say, okay, this is my interpretation and it's in line with what it's in the same league as what Adi Shankaracharya or Ramanuja did. That's nonsense.
But there's one thing I want to bring up with regards to this. Somewhere I feel our traditional scholars or people like you who are involved, like who are serious students of the Sanskrit language, right? Is there a way in which we can communicate authentically our traditions to a newer generation? Are we missing something? The authentic scholars, can something be done about it?
Unfortunately, a lot of traditional Sanskrit scholars are only experts in their own field. Today, without speaking the language of the masses, you can't reach the majority of the people. So it has to be either Hindi or Tamil or Telugu or English for the global scale. So if we don't speak this language of the masses, and if we don't put out authentic information which is readily accessible, then we cannot put our correct side in front of people. A lot of Sanskrit scholars are very good at debating, but if you ask them to critique a work of Sheldon Pollock, they would not.
Why?
Because I think the language used by the likes of Pollock or Wendy Doniger or even Devdutt Patnaik is a low-hanging fruit, but still, it's in English. It's said in a sophisticated way. It is presented in a nice manner. So to argue and debate is completely different from, to argue, debate, and write books and set a narrative is completely different from a Shastrarth. The skills are different.
Okay.
And we have to have multidisciplinary scholarship.
Correct.
Today, we have to have multidisciplinary scholarship. We cannot counter the charge that, for example, let's look at the charge that sibling marriage was common in Vedic times. This is a charge. Sibling marriage. It's a charge which has been put up by certain Western Indologists, citing the example of yam and yummy. How many traditional scholars have countered it? Pandurang Vaman Kane has. In his book, A History of Dharma Shastra, he has taken them to task and said, this is not the right interpretation. So somebody who is of that level, who can understand their arguments, and then who can present a counter, that is what is needed. Now we can't bring somebody to the table who says, okay, Vedas are aporishya, and hence this is true.
Okay.
That is a very theistic or belief-based argument. Unfortunately, Vishwasa cannot be used to counter Tarka or Kutarka. Whether a Kutarka or a Sat-Tarka, belief is not the counter to that.
In fact, the Nyaya philosophy, the school of logic itself would say that logic has to be countered.
Logic has to be countered with logic. And unfortunately, a lot of Sanskrit scholars who are great at Shastrartha and will do wonders at a Vidvat Sabha or speak extempore Sanskrit, no disrespect to them, by the way. But if you ask them to critique a work in English or Hindi, it's a completely different skill set. So that is where I think we need multidisciplinary scholarship. A little bit of scientific knowledge. You don't need a PhD in science or scientific studies. A little bit of scientific knowledge, a little bit of English, a little bit of mathematical knowledge, and a little bit of history would all go together with a bulk of Sanskrit knowledge. That is what is needed to counter such kind of false claims or propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes such word salads like, I'll just give you an example. I read it, I don't remember which book it was. There are oppressive power structures in the Sanskrit syntax. Like this kind of word saladry comes a lot from.
Let's take an example. We just had the Navaratra. So some days back, there was a campaign that Putran Dehi. People shouldn't say Putran Dehi during Navratra worship. They should say Santanan Dehi. And the logic that was put forward was that Putran Dehi is asked for sons. And we should ask for children, not sons. Now, the response to that, I wrote a twofold response. One was that Putran Dehi fits in the Anushtup meter. Santanan Dehi would break the meter. So first thing is that you're breaking the meter itself. So the prayer is in the Anushtup meter and you're breaking that. Second thing I said, that as per, if you look at Mallinath's commentary on the Kumara Sambhava, so where Himalaya is called Putravan. So Himalaya is called, it is said, Kalidas says that Himalaya was Putravan, but still, after he got Parvati, he considered himself to be lucky or really fortunate. So Mallinath says in his commentary that the word here, Putravan, means somebody who has sons and daughters, because there is an Ekashesha compound or Ekashesha Vidhi in Sanskrit grammar, which says that the masculine plural is used for both, for referring to both the feminine and masculine numbers together. This is not the case in German. For example, we say student and studentin. Student is a male student. Studentin is a female student.
So a parallel English example that I can think of is when you refer to human beings, you sometimes say man.
That's right.
But you actually mean women also.
Yes. And also there are rules in Panini's Ashtadhyayi which are like Puman Striya or, Pita Matra and so on, which specifically say that when we say Hamsau, it means a Hamsi and a Hams. So when we say, for example, Gavau, it can mean a bull and a cow. It can also mean two cows. Right? The word go especially, that can also mean two bulls. So I said that Putran Dehi means give us children. That is how it should be translated. That is how it should be understood. And there is no misogyny or there's nothing against the female child there at all in the original prayer. So let's not make an issue out of nothing. Another thing is, so when somebody like Pollock says that the Ramayana is a text in othering, and he gives, well, Pollock is a very well-read scholar. We have to admit that. It's a Shatrorapi Gunarvachya, right? Shatrorapi Gunavachya. So when Pollock says that the Ramayana is a text in othering, or somebody like, not Doniger, but somebody else who says that Mahabharata is essentially, or the Gita, a lot of people, I think even Amartya Sen or somebody said the Gita is like, is a text which incites people to commit atrocities, wars, and so on. How do we counter this? We don't counter this by saying Adi Shankaracharya has said this. No, we counter it by breaking down their argument. Because we are not here to establish what Adi Shankaracharya has said or what Ramanuja has said on the Gita. We are here to establish that your interpretation of the Gita is incorrect. And for that, we have to understand what the other person is saying, understand his or her logic, his or her terminology, and then counter it with support from the text of the Gita.
And the interesting thing here is Purva Paksha, like the traditional Indian style of even framing an argument, involves actually taking the other person's side. In fact, citing what they would feel in support of their argument and then dissecting their argument, right? Correct. So it is actually in line with tradition as well, in a way.
That's correct. That is correct. But somehow, it was our tradition. However, we have lost it. Especially when it comes to works not in Sanskrit. So we cannot counter logic by belief. That's what I was saying. We have to counter logic by logic. And multidisciplinary studies are the need of the hour. If somebody is arguing using history and genetics, we can't counter it using Vedic verses. We have to then understand those sources of history and genetics and then say, okay, this is the counter.
In fact, there is this trend also. Like, I was just trying to check how many historians, like of the past few decades, well-known names, how many of them actually know Sanskrit? And the answer to that is hardly any. In fact, I was talking to a professor of history in Sweden, and he told me that if you were to be a historian of the Vikings, you cannot be unless you know functional understanding of the Old Norse language. People won't, they would just laugh it off. If you just read English translations or whatever, modern Swedish translations, people won't take you seriously as a historian. And yet, here in India, you have people who have literally produced works and works of history with no function. If you were to ask them and I'm citing examples of people who don't know the language. In certain cases where people even know the language, if you were to put them next to you and ask them to give a speech, they would fumble for words, right? I mean, what do you think about this?
Well, I think it's also not easy to specialize in history and learn Sanskrit. Are there avenues?
Functional knowledge at least?
Functional knowledge, maybe at least an attempt should be made, or reliance on reliable sources. And so one thing which every scholar or writer should know is where to stop and where to trust other sources. For example, if I were to write something on ancient iconography in Chola temples or Tamil Nadu temples, I'm comfortable with Sanskrit text, but I'm not comfortable with Tamil text. So I would refer a work which people deem authentic and then build on my case. So I think that's what maybe a lot of historians do. They don't know Sanskrit, so they'll rely on some other works. But a lot of times things are lost in translation. So that's the issue. Is there a solution? Well, I'm not a historian. It's easy to criticize. It's not easy to be in their shoes. It's like today everybody is a historian, everybody is an economist, everybody is a cricket strategist, and everybody is a politician, right? Modi shouldn't do this, Modi should do this. Amit Shah shouldn't do this, should do this. Virat Kohli should have come at number 3 or number 4. Similarly, we judge historians, but if you look at their side also, I mean, what's the solution? Is the solution maybe for dialogue? Is the solution maybe for them to gain some understanding of Sanskrit or not?
I will pitch in my 2 cents here.
Sure.
You mentioned about Sanskrit scholars being multidisciplinary. There is a need for historians also
I agree
to be multidisciplinary.
I said Sanskrit scholars need to be multidisciplinary if they are to counter things said about Sanskrit or Sanskrit texts.
Correct.
Similarly, historians need to be multidisciplinary, yes, especially when they're writing about something based on ancient texts. For somebody who's digging up Harappa, maybe not. For somebody who's writing about maybe, say, the Middle Ages or based on Arabic or Persian sources, maybe not. But if you're writing based on Sanskrit texts, for example, the Ashtadhyayi or the Mahabhashya or the Ramayana or the Vedic text, then yes, a basic knowledge of Sanskrit is required, I would say.
Because my biggest worry here is the further away you are from the primary sources,
Agree.
the more the chances of
Agree.
manipulation.
Agree. Well, look at this. So Ambedkar wrote several books, including Who Were the Shudras, and he claims that I don't know Sanskrit in the beginning of his books, and he also says, but I've relied on sources which are considered authentic. So, but still, so he would look up. Say Griffith or some other translators who have done it. So you're away from primary sources and then you're relying blindly on a translator, which is very different from working with the primary source. So the interpretations of something which is based on what translators have said is always questionable, and we should question it. Maybe it's authentic, maybe it's not.
What do you think about this thing of Sanskritization, which is and the relationship between Prakrit and Sanskrit? And there's always this thing that the elite, the Sanskrit elites, tried to Sanskritize the Prakrit, or the Prakrit speaking people who wanted to move upwards tried to Sanskritize. What do you think about this relationship between Sanskrit and Prakrit in general?
Well, Sanskrit and Prakrit are 2 beautiful rivers of India, and they have merged. I mean, maybe they have a common source also. So both these cultures have enriched each other, both the Sanskrit culture and the Prakrit culture. If you look at some Jain texts, and even some not from Middle Ages, but even ancient history, they say that the nectar that you find in Prakrit poetry, it's not to be found in Sanskrit poetry because it goes straight to the heart. It goes straight to the heart. And that's a very valid argument. I've heard from so many people that the Avadhi of Ramcharitamanas goes straight to the heart, whereas the Sanskrit of Valmiki appeals to the mind, appeals to the intellect.
It's more scholarly, and this is more.
This is more natural, and it's natural for somebody to understand or appreciate things spoken in their own mother tongue. So Prakrits have been the Prakriti. Sanskrit has been the high culture, the refined culture. Which came first? There's a debate. So, as per Hemachandra and other Prakrit scholars also, the original is Sanskrit, from which Prakrit came. So, Prakriti is Sanskrit, and Prakrit came from Sanskrit. This is said by Hemachandra and many other ancient Indian Prakrit scholars, which I find believable because Prakrita and Paya. So, the Prakrit word for Prakrita is Paya. Paya Sadda Mahannavo. That is Prakrita Shabda Maharnava. So, Paya and Prakrita. Prakrit can corrupt to Paya. But how would you take Paya and make it Sanskritize it to Prakrit, which is beyond me, because Prakrit in Sanskrit has a well-defined etymology. It is from the root. It is from a prefix which has a sense, which is pra, and then kri root and prakriti, and from that we get prakrita. But there's no, to get paya in a prakrita with such an etymology, it's not possible. So to me, I think Sanskrit was a source. Prakrits came from Sanskrit, ultimately from Vedic, and that's how the cultures developed. Sanskritization has always been the case in India whenever we've tried to appeal to a wider audience. For example, the rule of Shivaji Maharaj, Raja Vyavahara Kosha was written, where there was where Sanskrit words for administrative terms in Arabic and Persian were given. He chose Sanskrit, not Marathi, because he wanted to appeal to a wider segment of this land.
Hindu Patshahi.
Yes. Yeah. So Sanskritization is always welcome, because we are going back to our roots. It's not to be opposed, in my opinion. Prakritization has already happened in languages. So, for example, in my own Hindi, it is Sanskritnisht and Prakritnisht. When I'm speaking with somebody from, say, a native Hindi speaker, I tend to use more Prakrit words. I would say Baras. When I'm speaking with somebody who's not a native Hindi speaker, I'll say Varsh.
Oh.
So that kind of runtime polymorphism, or a speaking style which is dependent on what language or what mother tongue the other person speaks. So when I would say I'm speaking to somebody from, or when I'm appealing to people from all over India, I would tend to use more Tatsama or Sanskrit rich words, even in my Hindi. So my Hindi is more Sanskritized depending on the audience. It is more Prakritized depending on if I'm speaking to native Hindi speakers.
Right. One of the major issues I think we are facing today in the modern world in India, especially with the youth, is there is a sense of cultural deracination. There is a delinking from the older way of doing things, from reading our sacred texts, from probably even associating culturally in any way. And one of the reasons I've heard, part of the reason is when the shlokas are chanted, we don't understand the meaning. So that is leading to a lot of deracination. So how do you think Sanskrit learning can be imbibed in a way that it is adopted? Some form of Sanskrit literacy is there in a mass scale, and how? Because I somehow feel something has got to do with not understanding, hence disassociating. What do you think about this?
I think people have to start young. Scientific studies have shown that the ability to learn languages diminishes with age. The best time to learn languages is when somebody is a child, at the age of 5 years or 6 years. Or when we, for example, when somebody who's brought up speaking Hindi, when that person listens to the words pani lao, he understands I'm being asked to get water. And that is then wired into his neurons for life. After the age of 18 or 19, there's a drastic reduction in the ability to learn a new language. Chess players, their ability to play chess diminishes after the age of 50. But the ability to learn a new language diminishes steeply. And in case of chess players, there's a gradual decline. The ability to play good chess. But for learning languages, the ability declines sharply after 17 or 18. So we have to start young. The first language that a child speaks must be their native tongue. Telugu, Tamil, Hindi, not English. That's the first step to stop cultural deracination. Second thing, even Sanskrit learning, it should start at the young age. And we should learn with stories. We should learn maybe with board books. There should be there are videos today where we teach what each animal is called in Sanskrit, or what each vegetable or fruit is called in Sanskrit. I have a book, the Katha Kusuma Saurabham. It is based on the Katha Kusumam by Ambika Datta. And this is a book which teaches Sanskrit, using English and Hindi through short stories of Ambika Datta. So I have a Sanskrit commentary on the short stories. I have the English and Hindi word for word and post translations. So with stories, with the stories of animals and birds, we can teach something to a child. Such kind of children-friendly learning material for Sanskrit needs to be prepared. There are books. We just need to refer to them. We just need to use them. And now there are many channels which are producing videos to teach Sanskrit to children. This is where I think we can make a difference. From our own home to people we know, our families, our friends, we can persuade people to learn the mother tongue and Sanskrit at a young age. And that will then help us a lot in understanding what we are saying in our prayers. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukha bhag bhavet. Now, somebody who knows Hindi well will understand sarve is sarva, everybody. Hindi or even other like Marathi or Telugu, other languages. Sukhina, something to do with sukh. I understand sukh. Sukh is happiness. Sukh is prasannata. Sukh is ananda. Niramaya, it's my son's name. Niramaya, okay, Niramaya is without illness. Sarve Bhadrani, Bhadra is something to do with Bhadra Purusha, auspiciousness. Ma Kaschid, I may not understand Ma Kaschid, but Dukha Bhag Bhavet, Dukh I understand. And Ma is something to do with no. Gujarati you say Ma Kuru. Hindi you say Mat Karo. So, with a good understanding of the mother tongue, it's easier to learn Sanskrit. Because Sanskrit has a close association with almost all major languages of India. Therefore, if somebody knows their mother tongue well, they will learn Sanskrit far more readily. So these are two things I would like to emphasize. Learn Sanskrit at a young age, learn your mother tongue, make sure our children learn their mother tongue well right in their childhood. And that will make a big difference in us understanding our culture, our texts.
But on a side note, it's a philosophical question. Do you think chanting mantras, Sanskrit mantras, without knowing the meaning is also like a virtuous thing? Or do you think knowing the meaning is equally important apart from the chanting?
There are different kinds of mantras. For example, there are Diksha mantra. Just the Rama mantra. Rama name is a mantra. These mantras are simple enough, like Om Namah Shivaya or Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So they are simple to understand. The other mantras, like the Vedic mantras, it's very important to know the meaning. Even in our texts, it is said that somebody who just chants the mantras without knowing their meaning is a useless person. That learning is of no use, just learning the chanting. So one has to internalize the meaning of what one is chanting for somebody to identify with the essence or the meaning of that mantra. So it is important to understand the meaning of these mantras, except for the simple, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, or the japa mantras or the sadhana mantras. Any mantra, the meaning, unless we self-identify with the meaning, with every syllable and every word of the mantra, it doesn't have the same effect.
Okay. In Sanskrit, there were different phases in the language development. One is the Vedic Sanskrit, the epic Sanskrit, the classical Paninian Sanskrit.
Yes.
Are these, and it's coming from a Sanskrit no voice, are these mutually intelligible? What is the degree of intelligibility between them? And conversational Sanskrit is similar to Paninian Sanskrit. Like, I just want to...
Sure. There is a good amount of intelligibility. So somebody who understands Vedic Sanskrit can surely understand the Laukika Sanskrit, the epic or the classical, because there are the classical Sanskrit is a simplification of the Vedic Sanskrit. Vedic Sanskrit has many different forms which classical Sanskrit does not have. Panini's grammar is both for Vedic Sanskrit and classical Sanskrit. Yes. So in the same grammar, Panini gives rules for Vedic and for Laukika. So he says Chandasi or Bahulam Chandasi, or he says this form is only available in Vedas. This form is only available in Loka. But it's the same grammar. So the same grammar gives you rules for Laukika and Vaidika. Another difference is the accent. Classical Sanskrit lost the accent. Vedic Sanskrit is accented. So Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, and a wide range of the swaras. The meaning of a word changes when the tone or accent changes. Okay. Right. So there's a story about Indra Shatru that Twashta performed a yajna and he wanted a son who would kill Indra. And so he said, I want an Indra Shatru to be my son. Now the word Indra Shatru, depending on whether it's Tatpurusha or Bahuvrihi, can mean both the slayer or the enemy of Indra and he whose slayer is Indra. Okay. And because he pronounced this katha comes in our text, because he pronounced it incorrectly, he had a son who was killed by Indra. So this accent is very important in Vedic to understand the Vediki Prakriya. And it's a part of all the grammar works also. But Laukika Sanskrit does not have this accent, did not preserve it. It got lost over time. So the classical Sanskrit is definitely a simpler form, without accent, without the special lakaras, without special pratyayas which are found in Vedic Sanskrit. Somebody who knows classical Sanskrit well can understand Vedic Sanskrit to an extent, but not completely. Somebody who knows Vedic Sanskrit correctly can understand classical Sanskrit without any effort. Wow. Okay. And somebody who reads the Ashtadhyayi completely will understand both the classical and the Vedic Sanskrit. Also, there are the Pratishakya works and other specific grammar works for Vedic Sanskrit. But yes, there are phases. With time, the accent was lost. Meanings of certain words changed. Certain new words arrived after some inventions or new discoveries and so on. So that's the case, yes.
Okay. Finally, I want to ask you, Hebrew as a language had a very similar, if not same, but very similar in the sense that it was a language of ritual which was lost in common spoken parlance to a large degree. And in fact, one would say that it was a dead language to a large extent, which wasn't the case necessarily with Sanskrit. And yet it got revived with Ben Yehuda and his movement in Israel, to revive the language. Do you see any possibility of a large-scale revival of spoken Sanskrit as a mass language? What could be done for
there is a possibility. There is definitely a possibility. We need an awakening. We need passionate people who awaken the masses that this is something we need to do. This is something we need to reach that critical mass. If not spoken Sanskrit at a large scale, then at least pockets of communities where Sanskrit is spoken, and there are some villages which are where this is being done. Vidvat Sabhas, you see Sanskrit, you see works in Sanskrit, you see epics, Mahakavya in Sanskrit, but we need more content, video content, audio content in Sanskrit. You look at the Akashvani Sanskrit Bulletin. It is telecast every day, twice a day. And we see Sanskrit there. Somebody's making notes, somebody is preparing the news of current affairs in Sanskrit and broadcasting it in Sanskrit. So we need similar efforts. It certainly can be done. And I am very positive that with more passionate people, with more people who are in a position to influence impressionable minds, youngsters, if they start advocating, if they start learning themselves to some extent and advocating, then I'm sure a lot of people will pick it up. And I'm hopeful. I'm quite hopeful that despite, just like the tsunami of Kunamas, we can overturn it. We can propagate good names. Similarly, the deracination can be overturned. We have to make an effort, a conscious effort, and passionate people need to come together. We need more audiovisual content, and I'm sure this can be done.
Great. It's been a fascinating chat, Nityanandji. It's been great to have you join us. Thank you so much, and we would definitely like to have you back in the podcast again.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this special edition of the Indic Paradigm Show. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe on the channel. We'll be meeting, similar such interesting people going forward as well. Until next time, always remember, Dharma rocks. See you around.